Hello, everyone, and welcome back into Attacking Third. I'm Sandra Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co host Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. On today's segment, we are chatting about Washington Spirit. We are doing a full team preview ahead of the regular season. So make sure you leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform because we're also on YouTube. You can subscribe to us at youtube.com/attacking third. Get all your exclusive NWSL content previews, recaps right here on A3. The regular season begins on March 25th, and you can watch matches on Paramount Plus. And we're doing a preview for every single team, a podcast, and on YouTube. This is our last team, okay? So if you have missed any of the previews, I promise you can go back and you can watch them on YouTube or you can look through our podcast feed. Okay. If you don't care about alphabetical order, that's fine. If you're only here for one specific team, hey, I love that too. I'm here for that
We're
energy.
all about that.
Check the channel, check the feed. Lisa, we're back. We got to talk about Washington Spirits, the last one, last team.
I promise we did them all. We talked about every
Yeah.
single team, every player on every team. It's been a joy, Sandra. It's been a nice progressive build up to the regular season. It's around the corner. We get to kick off with big games, big matchups to start the regular season. But this is our final team by team preview. Then we get to get into the nitty gritty of the matchups and things that happen. But we get to stay wide angle for now. Looking at the Washington Spirit. I mean, this is a team that's had some ups and downs. They've had some good times, some bad times. I think one of the good times to come is that they will be playing all their games at Audi Field. No more Segra. Say adios to Segra. I think that's a good thing for fans, for players, for viewers, for broadcasters. Goodbye, Segra. It's a good thing. I think that's a good start for Washington Spirit for this 2023 season.
I'm with you. I think again, we did these in alphabetical order, just to remind everyone, not in terms of like prediction and finishes and where we think they're going to land. So we're saving Washington Spirit because they are the W of the league. So let's maybe get into an overview for the team, just a quick refresher for everyone, in case you missed any moves or anything like that in the off season. I think it really started with the technical staff side of things for this team in their off season. We saw mid-season in 2022 with the Spirit, they had a coaching change. They terminated head coach Chris Ward. Later, through investigations, has been issued some conditions in terms of if he ever will come on back and coach in the league. Investigations found that he was the allegations of racial, essentially racial profiling were true, and they said can't work in the NWSL anymore pending certain conditions. And mid-season, they found themselves having to navigate a similar journey that they did in 2021. It's like they went through two consecutive seasons essentially, with a shakeup in coaching. For this team moving forward, they brought in Mark Kirkeren from Florida State University's club president to navigate the remainder of to help them navigate the remainder of the 2022 season, which was just a struggle
Yeah.
for this team, really from the get go, making an appearance in the NWSL Challenge Cup final, and then just having like a really just very heavy match loaded kind of schedule to start, and they just never found their footing. And then you add in the controversy with their coach
Yep.
and the very unfortunate incident that they had with a player, and you're just constantly like treading water, it sort of felt like, for this team.
It's a good
So
way to put it, treading water, yeah.
in terms of their off season, I think that's where they wanted to start, and we saw that reflected in the move. So they added pieces to their technical staff. I mean, Don Scott was a hire that we were really excited about. We were like, wow, they brought Don Scott back to the United States. She's in NWSL, going to help out with the Spirit and the technical and medical side of things. And they also hired Mark Parsons. They needed a new head coach, and they brought him back to the NWSL after he had a very brief stint with the Netherlands women's national team. A little bit of a return, homecoming perhaps. He was initially with the Spirit in their inaugural season in 2023 through 2015, but then was with the Thorns from 2015 to 2021, won a bunch of titles during his time with the Thorns. But yeah, Moriano Imaizumi was also named as an assistant coach. Someone who has ties to Florida State University,
Yep.
had a brief stint with Chicago Red Stars, now now with Washington Spirit. So they made these really notable changes across the technical staff. And it sort of set the stage, I think, for us that we wanted to see a little bit more continuity, but in the free agency pool or in the draft. And we just didn't really see that from this team in the offseason. We ended up
I
giving them
know.
a B for the offseason grade because we were left with way more questions than we had answers for this team moving forward into the 2023 season. And they're coming off an 11th place finish, nearly last place with a 3-10-9 record. I believe they might have set a record for draws.
Yes.
In 2022, it was tough. And you look at, it's like this team almost, they didn't get last place because Gotham existed.
Yeah.
Like
It's the
it was a
truth.
tough
It's the truth. And
2022.
you talk about, only 3 wins. That's pretty bad going from a team that won the 2021 NWSL championship to then only getting 3 wins the next year. Yeah, they set a record for most consecutive ties, I believe it was, or
Yeah,
most ties with 10. Um, and that's like probably one of the worst records you could set, and the worst one being the one that Gotham set, most consecutive losses. And Gotham was last place in the league last year, and the only reason Washington wasn't there is because Gotham was there. That's exactly it. This was a bad season for Washington last year. They struggled a lot. They had a lot of off season, or excuse me, off field things that were happening, which we saw that happen in 2021 as well with their ownership and everything that was going on there. But the fact that they could turn it around in 2021 and then in 2022, they really couldn't catch a break. As you said, at best, treading water, this team was. They couldn't catch a break again. And this time, I think the players were just a little bit too exhausted to translate that onto the pitch. And they couldn't get it together. I think getting Don Scott, pretty great. I think getting Mark Parsons back, interesting. I'm going to see how Parsons does this year. I think what he did at Portland was impressive, of course, establishing a culture, a winning culture. I think he has pretty good ability to develop young players. That's one big positive I will give him and this Washington Spirit side as we go through the roster. But other than that, I think it's going to be hard for Washington to come back from their D grade that we gave
yeah,
them, because they really didn't make too many changes in the offseason, and they lost a lot. And
yeah.
after a team that only gets 3 wins in 2022, you need to make some changes. You do.
After the season that they had in 2022 and the fact that they're approaching a World Cup year where they're another team that might miss a significant amount of players, yes, they needed to do something, right? And I think they did. I think they did. Yes, did they add players? Yeah, they did. We're going to talk about that. They utilized the draft to really kind of flesh out the roster, but they also lost a pretty key piece in light of that. In terms of like actual breakout signings for this team, maybe in a similar boat as some other teams, not as big a splash in the free agency period. They did do some re-signings, right? They brought
Mhm.
Barnhart back, they brought Amber Brooks back, kind of simple re-signings,
Yeah.
players that have been with the team. Hey, we want to retain you, and we need you moving forward. So that was smart. The headliner was probably the announcement of Chloe Ricketts, a midfielder, the youngest player to ever sign an NWSL contract. So that's maybe the headline stealer there in terms of off-season signings. Perhaps we look at Inez Warena, just
Mhm.
under that, a veteran in France, formerly played with Olympique Lyon, and so this is someone who can perhaps bring a different level of professionalism for what's going to be a very young team, because this Washington Spirit side navigated their draft the way they needed to navigate it. They needed to add bodies
Yeah.
to this
Depth,
roster.
depth, 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 depth,
They
depth.
needed it, and they walked out of that draft with several players, and they signed 6 first-year players out of the draft, but they also lost some things within that draft. Emily Sonnet was part of a trade with OL Reign to get more picks in this draft. They lost players through free agency. They do not have Kelly O'Hara anymore, signed with Gotham. And there's things like injuries, unfortunately. Those things happen in preseason. We've seen it year in, year out. We hate to see it, but it's a thing that happens. And they recently announced that Anna Helferty is going to be out with a season-ending injury. So maybe those 3 detrimental losses for this team moving forward in 2023.
They're big. They're massive losses. Despite, we have listed on our rundown 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in addition to the 6. So 11 players that Washington Spirit added to their roster. None of those, I'm going to be honest, are going to change the game. They're not going to come in and just completely flip the script for Washington Spirit. Meanwhile, the players that they lost, Kelly O'Hara, that's a massive hole in your back line. Massive. Emily Sonnet, massive hole in your back line. These are 2 women's national team caliber players, starting women national team defenders. They were on your team when you won the championship. They're veterans, they're leaders, massive. And then you also lose someone like an Anna Helferty, who it has, I think, the experience of those other 2 players, because she's been in the league for a number of years. She's played a variety of positions as well in this league, and she was such a consistent factor. She was also one of the most athletic players I think I've ever watched play. She's just constantly running up and down the pitch as a wingback player, contributing to goal scoring opportunities and crosses, and then also being a good defender. Those losses are way bigger than the 13 players that they signed this year. I think it's like adding a Band-Aid to a bullet hole on this team. And that's part of the reason that they got a D from our grading. I think when you look at the signings that Washington Spirit made, there are definitely some positives amongst this group in terms of adding depth, adding a Chloe Ricketts, but I don't think a Chloe Ricketts is going to make that much of an impact this year. At 15 years old, it's hard to come into a league and score all the goals and take a team from the second to last place to the top of the standings. It's not going to happen. So I like the signing for Chloe Ricketts. I like that it's available and it's an option for younger than 18 players.
We also need to just look at who her coach is going to be. Mark Parsons is not a stranger to having young players on the team.
No.
He was the coach with the Thorns when Olivia Moultrie made the headlines as the then youngest player of all time to sign a contract, and was not interested in piling too much on to a young player.
Yeah.
But that was also a pretty stacked roster. So, wanted to bring this player along slowly. This was not someone who was cracking week to week to week to week starting 11s for the Thorns. Was a player that was utilized off the bench. And I'm looking at Parsons with the Spirit, and there are a lot of young players that they're gonna roll with in 2023. But that includes Ricketts, but it also includes these multiple draftees that they just signed in.
6. There's 6 draftees that they signed, and what was their first pick? How late did it come? Where like 30th something, 25th pick,
like top pick in the 3rd round. All of the picks were later round picks. I think their first pick in the 3rd round.
Which there are definitely diamonds in the NWSL draft that end up falling to the 2nd and 3rd round, but to sign all 6 first-year players out of the draft that you have is it's depth. It's depth for these players and for this team. I think Inez Warrena out of France and formerly with Olympique Lyon, that's going to be a big veteran for this team, but also she's coming from into the NWSL. I mean, that's a shift. That's a change. I think a little bit of consistency with midfielder Marissa Shiva is going to help. This is a player that's been in and out of this roster for a number of years, and she ends up getting a contract in August of last year, re-signing that contract. That'll add depth to the midfield as well, but the losses are just bigger than the gains for this Washington side, and that's why we didn't give them a higher offseason score, and that's why I'm still concerned for this Washington Spirit team heading into 2023.
The defense is going to be
scary.
It's going to
because
be an issue. I think they might have
there'll
to
be a
figure
little
some things
Swiss
out.
cheese.
Sam Staub is a very valuable asset, I think, on that
Massive.
back line right now. And I think the club is also, um, thankful that they were able to negotiate a new contract for someone like an Amber Brooks
Massive,
out of free agency, because I think
massive.
there's a certain number of players that they're gonna really have to rely on when it comes to their defensive shape. I think moving forward into the regular season, no Sonnet, no O'Hara. I mean, we didn't mention the fact that Karina Rodriguez is with
Yep.
Club America. She was a defensive piece at times for them as well. So
Big
a lot
depth
of holes.
piece. We saw a lot of Rodriguez when, the internationals were gone, and we'll talk
Yep.
about it, but Washington has a lot of internationals that head out during the FIFA windows, and Rodriguez was one of those depth pieces last year for them, but the only reason, like, I don't wanna be preaching to the choir, but the only reason that you have depth players on a team is to get them experience, albeit limited experience throughout the year, but that way you can build upon them next year. And losing someone like a Rodriguez hurts this team because no, she wasn't a starting caliber player and she didn't
Yeah.
contribute the most minutes last year, but she contributed minutes and she was with that team through the lows. So then when you put her on and you play her alongside people in the midfield like a Sanchez and an Andy Sullivan, it gains that player's experience. And
Yeah.
that's what this team has lost.
And when we're talking about depth, that depth was something that this team needed to have going into 2023. That just looms larger when you look at a player like Rodriguez, who's
Yes.
now gone to a different league entirely.
Mhm.
Because this was a player that was drafted. One of those draft picks was maybe going to get some time, but had very limited minutes, and unfortunately, wanted to get more playing time, and is now in another league.
Yeah.
So we'll
Good
we'll
for her.
see. We've got they've got a roster. They've got a roster of players, and we got to talk about it. We're going to go through some things positionally, maybe identify some players that we might see on opening weekend. Stick with us. We're going to break down the roster after a quick break.
Welcome to the UEFA Europa League on Paramount Plus.
What a night!
Your home for more ultra-competitive, world-class soccer. Where Europe's elite and soccer's Cinderellas pump out that one-of-a-kind white-knuckle excitement that grows with every cut, every cross, and each and every... The UEFA Europa League, streamed every match live exclusively on Paramount Plus.
All right, let's take a look at the whole roster for the Washington Spirit ahead of the
Whole roster, HOLE or
the whole roster.
WHOLE.
The roster ahead of 2023. Let's talk about some players across positional lines, and maybe pluck some out that we might see in an ideal starting 11 for Mark Parsons. Goalkeepers: Nicole Barnhart, player that they re-signed in free agency; Oliver Kingsbury, Liza Bosselman to round out the three goalkeepers. Defenders: Dorian Bailey, Cameron Biegalski, Amber Brooks, Gabrielle Carlisle, Maddie Owell, and Helferty listed with a season-ending injury. Tara McCown, Sam Staub, Delaney Graham, Jordan Thompson. Midfielders listed as Jordan Baggett, Nicole Douglas, Bailey Feist, Tori Huster, Inez Warena, Paige Medier, Chloe Ricketts, Ashley Sanchez, Marissa Sheva, Andy Sullivan, Riley Tanner, to round that out at 11. And six forward listed with Ashley Hatch, Savannah Coleman, Lena Solano, Trinity Rodman, Melina Rembimas, a U18 non-roster invitee, and Mariana Speckmeyer, at the time a non-roster invitee as well. So when we're looking at the goalkeepers, the defenders, the midfielders, forwards, I think the big names, that stand out are players that have been with this team for some time, whether it's a Kingsbury and net for this team, or defensively a Sam Staub, or in the midfield. Maybe we're going to see a bounce back year from somebody like Tori Huster.
Yeah, that
Um,
would be great.
you know, obviously we're looking at somebody like Andy Sullivan in a World Cup year for this team. Trinity Rodman, Ashley Hatch, all players that you can look and say, hey, these are players that you can plug in, game day ready, ideal starting 11 type players. But who else kind of slots in around them? And who do we see if some of these players that we mentioned already go absent in a World Cup year.
Yeah, I think that you gave a shout to Tori Huster in the midfield. If the Spirit could get back a player like Huster, massive, massive. This is a player that had season-ending injury, her Achilles. She went out at the end of 2021. It's been a very long, treacherous road to recovery for Tori Huster. But she's a veteran. She's a leader. She's a player that solidifies in the midfield alongside someone like an Andy Sullivan and can really fill holes when we're looking at World Cup months and weeks that are happening with international windows. But I think we have to look defensively because that's where the biggest losses are for this team, and Sonnet and Kelly O'Hara, because they've got Aubrey Kingsbury, who has been a consistent factor between the sticks for the Spirit side and in goal. I think re-signing someone like Nicole Barnhart, Barney's she's the she's the best. Like, she's the biggest veteran in this league, essentially. And the fact that she still wants to be involved and she still wants to be on a team, I think that the team needs to lean on her for a little bit of leadership this year and camaraderie in the training room. But Kingsbury, she'll be the solidifier in between the posts for goal. But across the back line, you're exactly right. Sam Staub is going to have to step up big this year. And Amber Brooks, it's good that they were able to re-sign her as a free agent. But I think there's a lot of question marks about who else is going to fill that role. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Cam Bigalski in that outside back role, but this is one that didn't have a lot of consistency in that role last year, and perhaps because there was a Sonnet and an O'Hara filling that space. Dorian Bailey, we traditionally saw Bailey play higher in the midfield previously. Now, again, this is a different coach in Mark Parsons, and sometimes a coach can come in and just shake things up a bunch. And personally, I think Washington needs that. I do. I think that if we see Bailey along the back line, Tara McKeown, she's played a lot higher for this team as well. So that's something that I'm a little surprised to see. And the loss of Anna Helferty is big. But I mean, attacking wise, they've got their traditional pieces that have been with them, right? You look at the front four in an Ashley Sanchez and Ashley Hatch, Trinity Rodman, and Anna Helferty is a loss up there, but you've got a Tara McKeown that can slot in and play up there. I think those are going to be important pieces for this Washington Spirit side.
You know, I just like, we're going through the names on this roster, and you know, we're looking at players you could plug in maybe in an ideal starting 11 come, match week 1, right? And the World Cup is still some months away, so yes, we're likely going to see some of these bigger names that we've tossed out there. These and a lot of these players were part of that 2021 NWSL championship winning team. So are there good pieces on this roster? Yeah, of course. But that's literally something you could say about all 12 clubs in this league. That's not like a profound statement to make about the Washington Spirit. It's like, oh, there's talent on this team. Like, yes, of course. We also said that about Gotham last year, and they still finished where they finished. So I'm just curious in terms of like specific players who can have an impact or will be relied upon in light of a World Cup year. Because again, we've also been talking about players who might go missing for their team in long extended periods of times. So we're looking for young prospects to make an impact for their teams, and we're also looking at the experienced veteran piece that the team is likely to rely upon. And we mentioned Chloe Ricketts, that was perhaps one of the headliner type of offseason moves for this team. But I don't know if this is the player that Mark Parsons is going to say, you're going to be the one to be our young prospect and lead us in those exciting moments, right? Maybe we're looking more at these draft picks because they signed 6 players to contracts. Maybe we're looking at somebody like a Nicole Douglas, who was essentially their first pick in the draft out of Arizona State University. And maybe we're going to see some off the bench energy, like be a game changer. Had a good collegiate career.
I know. I don't think it's a bad pick by any means. This is an inexperienced roster, I'm going to say, with not a lot of players that have played together or that have played a long time in the league, and that's something that this team is going to struggle with. I just don't think we'll see enough of Chloe Ricketts this year. We know how Mark Parsons like to ease players into the league, especially being so young. I honestly, I think Nicole Douglas is a pretty good shout as a draft pick because this team signed all 6 draft picks that they had. That's a lot of youth. They're going to need to be utilized. And if given the opportunity, a Douglas, she could get time and get minutes, especially now that we know Anna Helferty is season-ending injury. She's SEI and she's out. Douglas plays across that front line. She can score goals. She's got a bit of versatility in the ability to do that, whether it's off the dribble, off crosses. She's got a pretty good aerial presence as well in Douglas. And if given the moment, Douglas needs to step up. She needs to be one of those players that can kind of come in and be a game changer. If anything, just bring energy and to spark off this bench. It's going to be hard to break into that front line, right? Like you're competing against Trinity Rodman, against Ashley Hatch, but there are still some places for players to get in and to find spots in that front line. And if Douglas can do that, it would be really good for Washington. It would be really good for them if some of their younger players, draft picks, can make an impact on this team.
No, it sort of mirrors, I think, a little bit what we saw, from Chicago last year. We knew that they were going to have a lot of young pieces, and what were those young pieces going to provide? So I think if you're asking, your young players to very quickly learn to become pros, that's one thing, but I think you've also got to give them, those examples, of what it means to be a pro. We hear all the time about how difficult that transition is from playing collegiately to playing pros, can be for some players. But I think when you're looking at this roster, you're also looking at, okay, well, who are they going to lean on? Where are they going to try to learn the ropes from, or who's going to show them the way of like professionalism, like within the league? So we were thinking about like who's going to be that player that this team is going to rely upon in terms of like the experienced veteran, and we're going to go with a goalkeeper. We're going to go with Aubrey Kingsbury, in this role for the team, because this is someone who has been the starting goalkeeper for the Spirit for quite some time. We've had Kingsbury on the show before. Always has spoken from a place of leadership, like with this team, whether it's been, whether the armband has been given to her or not, but has always sort of been one of those players. And I just think with the World Cup approaching as quickly as it is, and we're going to talk about players who might go missing for the Spirit. Kingsbury is one of those players who was initially receiving call-ups with the national team, but hasn't had one in quite some time. So I think we're more in the camp that she is likely to be a figure for this Washington Spirit side more consistently throughout this 2023 and this World Cup cycle. And we think she is going to be that presence both on the pitch and in the locker room that the team looks to and went ahead and, kind of rely upon her.
Yeah, I think she is going to be that player that needs to step up as a vocal leader and as a locker room leader, and then of course on the pitch. But I think a Kingsbury is one that can do that. She's got a couple years of experience. She's been with this team through a lot of their ups, a lot of their downs. But can she bring them together, unite them in this 2023 year, especially when there is a lot of ins and outs of international windows? And this is a player that also has been on the other side of the call-ups, getting called into the United States women's national team, and most recently has kind of been weaned out of that role and hasn't been called in a lot. So she knows what it's like to leave your team to go play internationally and then to come back and kind of be able to pick things back up. So she'll, I think, as a veteran, can be able to bridge that gap for some of those younger players that are doing that, like a Sanchez, a Rodman, Hatch, Sullivan, that when they're gone, can Kingsbury keep the team together, be the glue that holds everything in place, pick up points, but I guess they did that last year with their 10 ties. But pick up points and pick up wins. It's a lot of it's going to fall on Kingsbury's shoulders, but I think she's up to the challenge. I really do.
No, I'm with you. She's a player that I've enjoyed speaking with
Mhm.
before in the past. Whether it's been in media availabilities or here on the show, and I just think that's going to be the player that they probably rely heavily upon. I think it's for teams like the Spirit, it's going to often be a defensive type of player. So whether it's a goalkeeper or somebody like an Amber Brooks, who has a lot of experience in the league at this point in her career, and even Andy Sullivan, right, in
Mhm.
during her time with the team. Even though we believe that Andy Sullivan is one of those players going to the World Cup, so they have a few of them. Washington Spirit, just like every other club in the league, is likely to miss some players during the World Cup, and it's not just at the United States level. There's a number of players, but in terms of the United States, we're looking at Andy Sullivan as a possibility, Trinity Rodman, Ashley Sanchez, Ashley Hatch. These are all players who have been called into national team camps under head coach Vlatko Andonovski for quite some time, but we're also looking at Gabrielle Carl for Canada, Marissa Sheva for Ireland. So again, anywhere from 4 to 6
Yeah.
players who could be gone for this Washington Spirit side. I mean, that's a huge chunk of players. I mean, at this point, when you're even just looking at the US side of things, that's 4 of your possible starters.
Yeah. It's a lot. I mean, now it's less than it was in previous years because the roster has foregone with Kelly O'Hara and Emily Sonnet, but still that's a lot of players and starting caliber players that could be gone for a very big chunk of it. I think when we look at the biggest kind of spotlight on those players, and Andy Sullivan, a Rodman, and a Sanchez are the ones that shine the brightest to me as to what they've been able to do at the international level with the United States women's national team. And maybe it'll also help them, right? I mean, it's very tiring to go and leave your club team and play for country, specifically in the World Cup. It's a lot of minutes, it's a lot of travel on the body, but sometimes it gives those players that national team rub. And we've seen that happen with a Rodman, with a Sanchez. They've kind of stepped up their game a little bit. And now as they're getting into their junior season, their third year in the NWSL, can they be able to translate that back to their club when they return and not just deflate because they're not surrounded by Alex Morgan anymore or
Yeah.
Mallory Swanson setting them up for these great opportunities? But can they kind of channel that national team energy, that championship mindset that they have when they play with the national team and bring it back to their club, elevate the status of all the players around them and be those catalysts to do that? I'm leaning on someone like a Rodman and a Sanchez because we haven't really seen it from Sullivan. We it's hard for Sullivan to be a leader on her own. She's much better when she's doing that alongside someone. She's more of a silent leader. When she speaks up, everyone's listening to her. But can a Rodman and a Sanchez be those players to kind of kickstart everything with this team now that they're not the young ones and the new ones anymore?
Yeah, no, I mean it's an interesting point. I mean, I listen. I remember Rodman in her rookie year, like referring to somebody as Sullivan as like that that pro on the team that she looked to as an example. Whether it
Mhm.
was on the pitch or off of it. But this is a player. These are 2 players who are likely to be absent. In a World Cup year, where is the team going to reach for that during those stretches of time? And I mean, look, Gabrielle Carl, we're already talking about the defensive line and holes we might see. And they made this signing to try to plug some of that up. And this is a player that might be gone during the World Cup. Marissa Shep for Ireland. I mean, we didn't even mention Briley Tanner for Panama, and
I know.
she's just coming off of a great international window with Panama. I mean, my God, they clinched
Just
a final
qualified,
spot in the
yeah.
World Cup, and she scored.
Yep.
So I mean, like when you're looking at a season in front of you that has so many new parts to it, whether it's in the technical staff side of things or even on the roster, a World Cup year just adds to even more possible disjointedness within the schedule. So when we're looking at the Spirit and we're looking at the season approaching, what's the biggest burning question around this team? Because the reality is, yes, they do have talent on this team. They've got good players on this team. just like all 12 clubs in the league. And they are 2 years removed from an NWSL championship final. That was an incredibly unique set of circumstances that they had to unfortunately compartmentalize and go through. We heard all along through players when we were chatting with them through that 2021 season the difficulties of that.
Yeah.
And playing for each other and getting to that moment in time was kind of part of what helped get them through it. But if you're 2 years removed from that, you've got a new head coach, you've got new technical staff, and you've got half of a roster that's nearly new as well. Is the burning question around this team that they have something to prove? Was 2021 a fluke year for this team? And can they get back to the postseason in a first year under Mark Parsons?
I think it's such a good question because the history of this team, I mean, they won it. They won the championship in 2021. At the start of the 2022 season, their roster had the least amount of changes of anyone in the league, and they finished 11th. They couldn't turn it on. It's almost like 2021 was fight or flight response for this Washington Spirit team with all the turmoil that was happening off the pitch in the front office with the ownership all over the papers and in the media and headlines. These players really turned inward and took what they could do on the pitch and took it to the championship and raised the trophy at the end of it. I think that this year will be better than last year. I do for this team. I think that because of the changes they made, getting a new head coach in there that wasn't part of any of the ownership battles that happened. I think despite it being Mark Parsons or not, it's more of the newness of having a new coach in there. And Angela Salem, who's a former Thorns player, is on the technical staff. She's an assistant coach working with Mark Parsons. I think that Salem has helped this team. And what they've been able to do in the communication between players and coaching staff. But I think that it's going to be a lot for this team to prove that 2021 wasn't a fluke and that they deserved that championship and that they fought for every single one of those wins. But was it just something that kind of came to them because of everything that was happening on the pitch and they came together on the pitch? I don't know. I think that this year will be better than last year. I think this team will take steps forward. But also, I think that Gotham was a little bit of the safety net for Washington last year because Gotham was just worse than them. Yeah. And I think Gotham has taken steps forward. So it's going to be hard. The projected finish for my Washington Spirit this year in 2023 it's going to be a struggle for them to turn it around. I think they will take strides to move forward because they've got good pieces, but every team has good pieces. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. I still think they'll be outside of that playoff window, a 7-8 to 11, honestly.
7 to 11. It's a wide
range. It's a wide range, but they're not in playoff. I don't think they'll be in playoff contention. I'll put it that way.
But I'm with you on that. I just look. I think there are people who are bullish on the Spirit, and they should be again because there's good individual pieces. But everything I think that we've seen and heard from this franchise in the offseason, specifically from Parsons. The need to navigate a World Cup year, to have a roster fleshed out with younger players. There's all things here within these quotes or these scrums that you receive or you hear, and it just sort of feels like they too are trying to maybe tamper some sort of push back some like very, very high expectations. Every single professional team wants to go out there and win and compete and do well and win titles. But they also are in a bit of a retooling year. I don't know if they are a franchise that is calling it a full-on rebuild, but it's even with these pieces that they have, the star players like a Rodman or a Sanchez or a Sullivan, even with that trio of players, that there's still a little bit of a rebuild around, even if it is just around those players. And typically that doesn't always translate into, a very long or extended postseason push. Though I am enthusiastic and excited to see where these chips will fall and where they will lie for this team moving forward. So love to come back and be proven wrong. We love that so much on Attacking Third. So we'll see if we're talking about the spirit in a different lens. And we're just gonna kick back and get ready for the start of the regular season, because that's a wrap on team by team previews. We've got all 12 done. Go back, check the YouTube channel, go back, check your podcast stream, and find the team that you want a quick preview on or recap of, because we did all 12 for you. It's been a blast. We cannot wait for the regular season to kick off. It's going to be on March 25th, and you can watch games on Paramount Plus. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Attacking Third. Download, follow, listen to us anywhere you get your podcast. Fill out those March Madness brackets. You still got like 10 minutes. Make sure you watch us. We're on YouTube. Subscribe to us at youtube.com/Attacking Third, and we will be back with more NWSL content for you all as the 2023 season kicks off. For Sandra Herrera and Lisa Roman, this was Attacking Third.